Okay, so this is COMP2106, Advanced Server-Side Scripting, and this is, what, week 7 or 8 now? So for assignment 2, as I just said before I started recording, it'll be split into 2 parts. The first one is going to be first draft. There's going to be some external documents and prototyping that is done for this. Reason being, and I'm sure you guys have already done more so in the design program, whereas computer studies or computer programmer is a little bit different. But usually it's a good idea to prototype what your application is going to look like first. So that way when you go to build it, you kind of have a good idea of how you want the design elements on the page to look and how they interact and stuff. So there's a couple of requirements for being able to do that. This assignment is a group project. So you can work up to a group of 3 members, so you and 2 others. It's no requirement, I guess. Well, sorry, no, it is a requirement to work in a group. You can work just with a partner, but no more than 3 people. Reason is so that way I can evaluate you guys working like in a team as opposed to an individual, like the last assignment. So a couple examples of sites that you guys can create is a survey site. So I'll go into it more. It's further down in the document. But you can either do like a survey site where you ask questions and people fill out the form and answer it, and you're able to view the answers. Another one is a bracket or tournament web app. So I don't know if you guys are possibly familiar with different sites that do that. I know I had a friend that did one for Smash Brothers, but you can also do the same thing with sports with a kind of tournament round robin kind of bracket site, or in incident management, which personally is a little bit more boring, but the idea basically being that you're going to have logged in users, you're going to have individual content for each user. And then, of course, all of these require some sort of like form submission using a database. So as before, it must be hosted on a live site that supports a node server. So typically what we've been using in class is Heroku because it's free and it's really easy. But if for some reason you want to use Azure or AWS or whatever really cloud host that you want, you're more than welcome to do that. Just make sure that it works. So the common requirements. So the common requirements are for all 3 of these sites. It's kind of like the basics, and then there are individual requirements for each project. Also, if for some reason you want to do something that is not of the 3 in your group, if you just want to approach me individually and just ask, and I'll probably sign off on it as long as it meets a lot of the similar requirements. But the web app must be designed using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I don't know how you would design a website otherwise, but it still says. We're going to be using reactjs, so there might actually be some cases where it says Angular in here. Just ignore that. It's from before, but we're going to be using some React. We'll go over that next week. But being able to make our front end a lot more usable rather than just static done in Pug. So the issue with Pug is once you send the response to the user, you can't update what it looks like on the front end unless if you use JavaScript, as you guys are aware. And React is really good for using that, so we'll end up doing some React stuff as of next week, but is not a requirement for part 1, which is going to be due next Thursday, or like this coming Thursday. So you guys have a week for that. Your CSS rules reside in separate files in their own folder and adhere to best practices. You guys are welcome to use Sass or Less or any sort of preprocessor that you want if you guys are comfortable with that. It is out of scope, but again, if you guys prefer it, you're more than welcome to do so. As on the last one, your JavaScript files are also in their own area and are contained and appropriately linked. It's highly recommended that you use CDNs where you can. For example, when we're using Bootstrap, you can just require in the files from Bootstrap and not have to manage it inside of your application. Images and multimedia, so if you guys are using any videos, also need to be in their own folder and appropriately linked. You may need to provide additional versions of your multimedia assets to accommodate various viewport sizes, so that way it looks appropriate on a mobile device versus a desktop. Again, if you guys are using multimedia, it might be easier just to upload it to like YouTube, because that's usually a pretty good one to handle that. Obviously, your code has to be error-free, and the Mongo database must be hosted online, otherwise it won't work. We've only been using Mongo Lab in class, but again, there are other platforms that you can use a MongoDB hosted online. The other thing is internal documentation. Some of you guys didn't end up doing that on your assignment. This is going to be a little more, I'll make sure that you guys are doing a lot more on this one. Just to include the file name, the author's name, the website name, and a file description. Reason for this is usually it's one of the easiest ways to catch plagiarism. If you copy someone else's and don't change the comments, it's usually pretty straightforward. But also, as I've mentioned, in the workplace, comments are pretty important, especially if you end up working on new code bases. You want to be able to hand that off to someone and not really have to explain much. Because comments should be descriptive and have a good understanding of how the project and each individual file works. You don't have to go overboard, just really kind of basic description of what that file does. Ensure that you include section headers for all your HTML structures, CSS, and any JavaScript functions. So just explaining what a function will do. Ensure all your code uses contextual variable names that help, so don't do var a, make it useful. Ensure that you include inline comments that describe your GUI design and functionality. Again, this is more inline comments are usually useful if it's not apparent just by looking at it what it does. So if you have a div called container, putting a comment saying this is a container, kind of not helpful. But if you end up having some complicated logic inside of your application, then just putting in a quick comment of maybe why you're looping over data or something like that can be helpful for, again, someone that doesn't understand your code. So this is the external document that I was talking about. For this, for the survey site, bracket, or incident management app, we're going to create like a company logo. It doesn't have to be fantastic. I'm not marking your artistic ability, but just for basically creating a company website, having a logo, table of contents, description. Really, this would be like if you were to give this to a client as a proposal for wanting to do like a website for them. This is quite common. So they'll have wireframes of how it works, description of it, table of contents, organized, so that way you could give something to a client and have them as a client and be able to do work for them and get money. So screen capture section and also potential future functionality. So if you guys are like really into this application that you're working on, you could put in what would be a good idea for future stuff that is out of scope of this project. So whether that be, I don't know, in the case of, let's see, the bracket tournament app, a potential future functionality could be the ability to have a template that you could use over and over again without having to manually re-enter the names or something like that. And then, of course, you guys have to put your code on GitHub. Then I have to be able to see it. The big thing is there were some students who had just done some kind of shitty commits on GitHub. Really, the big thing about doing a commit on GitHub is when you have basically hit a small milestone. And the reason that you do that is for some reason if you ever need to go back, because sometimes you overwrote something, or just basically it's like saving your work periodically. So instead of doing your entire application in one go, it's usually best as you finish small parts of the project, being able to save that and do a commit. So again, just doing one commit is not helpful, but this is just trying to make sure that your version control is using best practices. And then, of course, because we're putting it on GitHub, then we can do our cloud hosting connected to our GitHub repository. So now we're getting into more of the app-specific requirements. So for the survey site, the tournament bracket, and the incident report management. For the survey site, the user management and site security is out of 5 marks, or sorry, 8 marks, 5 for the GUI and 3 for functionality. So a user registration must be included with a form of like a username, password, email address, etc. And that will be stored in your MongoDB. User must be able to log in, log out, and modify his or her profile. So just change password is usually the most common one, or even changing a username depending on how you do it. And then site security that will prevent any non-registered users from creating a survey or entering secure areas of the site. So we kind of went over that a little bit on, not last Friday, but the Friday before, where you can protect or have authenticated routes, so that way only someone that's logged in can do it. A user can create a survey. So after a user is registered and logged in, he or she can create a survey based on 1 or 2 possible survey templates. So multiple choice, agree, disagree, short answer, etc. The user should be able to customize survey questions. This includes the question and text and response options. The user should be able to create a timeline for the survey. So basically when the survey will expire, or when you can no longer either access the survey and give answers, or just when it doesn't show up on the site anymore. Kind of your choice on how you do that. Anonymous users can respond to any active survey, as mentioned above, but they cannot create one. So anonymous users should be able to select an active survey and respond to survey questions. And these survey responses will be stored in the database for later use. Secure reporting section. A registered user will be able to get simple analysis for any survey that he or she owns, including the number of respondents and survey answer statistics. The statistics from each survey can be exported in some manner, either like an email, printed, export to Excel, really kind of any method of your choosing. And that's kind of the end of that. Does anyone have any questions for the survey site specifically? No. Okay. So on to the tournament bracket site. Same sort of thing. User registration must be included with a username, password, email address, etc., which will be stored in your MongoDB database. User can log in, log out, modify his or her profile, and the site security will prevent non-registered users from posting comments in a forum or creating a new topic. So this is going to be in all of them, the user management section. But for creating a new tournament, after a user is registered and logged in, he or she can create a new single elimination tournament. Each tournament will have a name and include a short description. When a user creates a tournament, he is considered the owner and can choose when it becomes active and when it is completed, in the same way of the expiration of a survey. Users can register players. So a user can register players by completing a form that includes several player name fields. A fixed number of players will be allowed to be registered. For simplicity, you can do like 8 or 16. I recommend doing an even number, so that way you can do some sort of tournament for it. If you do an odd amount, then obviously that makes it harder, but you're more than welcome to do so. An active tournament will display a list of the players to anonymous users, so someone that is not logged in. And depending on the number of players, there will be a fixed number of tournament bouts initially. So 4 bouts for 8 players and 8 bouts for 16 players. Opponent selection for each bout will be decided in player registration order, so just how they come in. The tournament management. So a tournament can be started only after all players have been registered and the initial bouts determined. A tournament will include a fixed number of rounds depending on how many players are registered. So 3 rounds for 8 players, 4 for 16. Each tournament round will be displayed as a separate form page. So that way you can just put in who won. The tournament owner will be able to select the winners for each round in every round. and only the winners will be carried forward into new bouts for each successive round. And when the final round is completed, a summary of the results will be displayed. So this one I would say is a little bit harder than the first one, but is a little bit different and has some different functionality for it. When we get into doing more front-end reactive programming, something like React would be super beneficial for this, so that way it's easy to put in new users and being able to modify the display for how the tournament is going. You could potentially do animations as they slide into each bracket. But does anyone have any questions about the tournament bracket site? Yes?
Not the sites, excuse me, the site specifically, but when are the actual due dates?
Where are the actual due dates?
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
They're due in 2015.
Oh, that didn't save. Okay. In the syllabus, so part 1 is due next week, and then part 2 is due 2 weeks after that. So 3 weeks from now is part 2. Yes?
So what do we actually get into part 1?
So part 1 will be the first draft of the external document and the initial project structure setup in a similar way to what part 1 was for.
Like a GitHub repo?
GitHub repo, probably 4 commits. Really, as much of part 2 is the whole thing, and you're welcome to get as much done for part 1 as you want. Again, it's just to get you guys started and not wait until the last minute, because especially this one, compared to the last assignment, this is a lot bigger. There's a lot more that's involved in this, which is A, why it's a group assignment, and B, why there's a little bit longer to get it done as well. So you get 3 weeks instead of 2. I can kind of put in some bullet points and update this on Blackboard for more specific on what is due. Again, I'm just kind of taking the template that was used before. So, yes. So is there any other questions before I go on to the last one, which is the incident management site? Any questions? Nope. Okay. So last one, same thing. Login, edit, registration form, all that stuff. The incident dashboard. So after your user is registered and logged in, he or she can view an incident dashboard that will display all open incidents or tickets in a clickable list format. The dashboard will include an option that allows the user to create a new incident. The incidents that are closed will be initially hidden, but an option on the dashboard will allow the user to view all incidents. When a new incident is created, a form will be displayed that will require the user to select and/or complete several fields, including incident description, priority, customer information, and incident narrative. Again, all of this is required to be behind authentication, so that way an unregistered user is not able to submit a new incident. The incident record will be stored in numerical order, and the incident record number will be generated based on the incident date. This is typically the number provided to the customer as a reference. Each incident record ticket will include an incident narrative that will be timestamped with each status change or incident modification. This will provide detailed incident information as well as an audit trail. So if that didn't make any sense, basically when you have the status of an incident, when you change it from being, say, in progress to completed, we should be able to track when that change was made and what it went from and what it went to. So that way, if this was used in like an actual organization, you want to be able to, as if you're the person that was injured, you want to be able to say, like, if you didn't get the care that you were saying, you'd say, no, that didn't happen. And as the organization, you'd be able to say, like, no, we helped you out on like May 15th. That's when we, provided you the support and all of our end was done. So that's what that will be for being able to track differences when there are changes made. And each incident record will have a status field associated with it. Initially, the status field will be set to new. And then you can really do, as you see right here, sorry, just below, you can do as many different statuses as you want. So when the So with this, you'll have the client side and then the organization side. And when the organization replies, you can either have it as, say, dispatched, in progress, or waiting for customer, kind of whatever you want. But just being able to change the status based on what has happened inside of the ticket is the easiest. So a registered user can change the status field of an incident by first selecting it on the dashboard and selecting the appropriate status. The user must then enter a comment in the incident narrative. Once the status of an incident record is set to closed, it will not accept any further modifications. Certain fields will appear grayed out and will not be modifiable, such as the incident record number, customer name, incident duration, because you don't want someone to just be able to change who an incident is for. And lastly, every active incident record will include an incident resolution field, which must be filled out before a ticket can be officially closed. So there's kind of two parts to this. We haven't had to do any actual files being submitted besides GitHub, but for the external document that was mentioned before, it can either be in a Microsoft Word file or a PDF, and again, that will be the outline of your application that gives a description of it. And then secondly, ignore the zip archive link to GitHub for the project. There's no point in submitting a zip. Get rid of that. This is kind of just the breakdown of the marks. And this assignment is also worth 25% of the total mark. For this assignment, 10% will be deducted for each late day. So if it's due on Thursday, you submit it Friday, you'll lose 10%, so on and so forth. And as per usual, all code is expected, except for using like online modules, is expected to be your own. So if you end up copy pasting something from Stack Overflow, just put a comment reference to it. But as for actual like copying projects, please don't do it. I've already had some students who were written up for academic misconduct. So just don't do it. It's a lot of work. But also you guys don't learn anything from it. So really that's the important thing, is you guys are in this class so that you can learn how to do server-side programming, and I'm wanting to know what you guys are capable of, not what someone else is capable of. So that's mostly it. I will update this for like basically a bullet point list of exactly what is required for assignment 1, and if it's not in there, assume that it's for assignment 2, or sorry, part 1 and part 2. Is that good? Does anyone have any questions about assignment 2? All right.
Can you just like repeat all that?
Yeah, I'll just play back the YouTube video. Nice try. All right. So do you guys want to reuse the application that we were using just before reading week for authentication, so that way we don't have to redo a lot of it?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, so if you guys want to either clone down or copy the folder that you guys used for the week just before reading week, mine is here somewhere, week 7. Copy week 7 week. And how do you guys usually refer to it? Because this is technically week 8 of class, but week 8 is reading week. So do you guys prefer week 8 or week 9?
Week 8.
8? Okay.
Week 10. Don't listen to me.
I try to. Okay. So git init, git commit init. Okay. So I'm going to be pushing up the project of what we're going to be using. So I'm going to create a new repository that's going to be called COMP2106, winter 2019, week 8. So here's the GitHub repository. I will put it in weekly learning. Authentication part 2 is not open. Give me 1 sec. I'll open this up. GitHub code. Okay. So the reason why we oftentimes use OAuth, which is what we're going to be using for using another service's login, is because I'm sure you guys constantly see in different news, or I don't know if you guys have ever used it before, but oftentimes databases get hacked. Companies get hacked. You look at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which is Facebook, but you look at all these large companies and they constantly, you see them in the news for different data breaches. Yahoo got hacked at one point and every email address that was registered on the platform was logged. So, which is obviously a big issue. A lot of these big companies are huge attack fronts just because when you have billions of users, wanting to hack them is a lot more than if you were to have like a small local site. However, typically a lot of these companies also have a lot better security than what we would end up implementing ourselves, which is why we oftentimes use libraries like bcrypt with mongoose to being able to encrypt our passwords. But when it comes to the actual security of our databases and whatnot, a lot of these companies typically have better security. So the benefit to being able to log in with different services is you're not on the hook for having to manage a user's password. If for some reason someone tried to, if your database ended up getting hacked, the only thing that you would have to notify to the user is more that their data was compromised, but not their actual login credentials, because that is housed by Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, etc. So you get a benefit from that of being able to handle it, as well as usually also the speed and the any sort of like issues, being able to handle like forgot passwords of people getting hacked just as an individual user rather than a security issue, is also handled by Facebook, Twitter, etc. So it's kind of one of the benefits, as well as I'm sure you guys know, you end up getting a username, password, or email and password for a bajillion different platforms. And being able to log in with one credential is usually a lot easier. That's why a lot of places have started coming out with password managers to being able to manage your passwords for every site. So it kind of solves the idea of not having to use one password on every site. Instead, you just use one platform for every site. So if we end up going to log in with GitHub, GitHub has documentation on how to register your application and being able to accept user authentication through it. So the first thing that you'll need to do is register your application, so that way it will work. So I'll open that in a new tab. So in this case, it wants a name, so I'll just call it same thing, COMP2106, winter 2019, week 8. Our homepage URL. Maybe it might be a good idea to deploy to Heroku first then, so that way we have a homepage. And then last thing is you have what is called an authorization callback URL. And what that means is when you are done logging in through GitHub, it needs to know what URL needs to be redirected to, so that way it will verify that on your application side to let it know that you've successfully logged in. So I'm going to open up Heroku. And log in with my account. And create a new application. Same thing, COMP2106, winter 2019, week 8. And create it. GitHub. Connect to week 8. Now that's connected, I'm going to enable automatic deployments and deploy the branch. So now I have the URL that I can enter inside of my homepage URL. And we're going to have a authorization callback URL, which to show, it probably will have it in here somewhere. Callback. So here's an example of what they're doing. So their application is running on localhost 4567, and then the callback URL they have is just /callback. So you could do login success, or you could do, if you're going to have multiple platforms that allow for a callback of logging in, you would probably set up a unique one for each one. So in this case, I'm going to have it as /GitHub callback, and then we can register our application. And then you have some other stuff that you can also do in here, such as like a logo. So the important things that you're going to need is you have your client ID and a client secret. These are used on the server end to being able to verify your application when you log in. So this looks like it's using something, oh, here we go. That's with probably Python. So we used passport.js, and as I showed, there are roughly about 502 different strategies that you can use with Passport, and one of them will be Passport with GitHub. So chances are we're probably going to use this one just because it has more downloads. Someone else has made a GitHub too, probably because it solves different kind of issues, either speed or whatnot. But in order to add this to our application, we're going to have to use npm install. So inside our folder, do npm install /save. And then I'm going to also open up the code. So inside of our application, as I showed you, we set up a route for GitHub callback. And we're going to have to register that like we do any other route inside of our application. So inside of routes, we can just do it inside of index. We're going to want to register /GitHub callback. Yeah. And it will take, for now, request response next. And we're going to res.send GitHub callback. So now if we were to run our application with npm run dev, need to do npm install maybe. Okay, npm run dev. There we go. So sometimes when you copy from a folder, you can get issues with your node modules folder. Usually the easiest thing is just to delete that folder and then just reinstall it. So now if I go to my local application on port 3000, we had our login from before with an email. We can log out. But if we go to /GitHub callback, see here that we're getting, this is the response that I'm sending back right now. So obviously that's not very helpful for GitHub. So inside of here, we're going to create a new strategy for using our GitHub passport. So same thing, you have to put in the callback URL. In here is the client ID and the client secret that was provided to us from GitHub right here. And then it does the same sort of thing that we did before, where it uses find or create for just creating a local reference in our database. We don't end up storing the username's, the user's username or password. What we do end up storing is a profile ID. So that way we just recognize that that user has logged into our service before using GitHub and isn't using like an email or password. And then in our callback, we end up using passport authenticate. And we do the same thing like we did for regular email and password, is if there's a failure, we redirect to login. And then on here, this is assuming that it was successful, it will just redirect back to the home page. Sometimes you can also just use success redirect as well, which we did on the email. But on here, yeah. And then the other thing right here is for authenticating with GitHub without using a failure redirect. So these are kind of two different ways that you can do it. But first, we're going to want to set up our strategy. So right here. So just by following this, where was I? Right here. We're going to want to require in our passport GitHub into our app. So right here we have our passport local. We want passport GitHub. And then right here, we can just actually just copy this and put it right here. And this is going to be taking the client ID and the client secret, which we can just copy in from GitHub. So OAuth, client ID, right here, as a string, and then the client secret. And then we can just do GitHub callback. Okay. So now inside of our callback, we want to take the passport authenticate that we're doing similar to, like I said, on the for a username and password. We can copy that in here. We're just using passport authenticate local. And in our callback, we want to use passport authenticate GitHub with a failure request going back to /login. And in here, I'm going to do a console log of logged in successfully. And we're going to do a res redirect to the index of our application. So now, if I just refresh this, it says that it wasn't found because there's a bunch of information that's missing up top here, which is what is passed in from GitHub when you log in. But to test it, now what we have to do is put a login with GitHub button right here. So we continue. Where did I put it? Right here. We need to be able to go to GitHub to get the logging in with our application. So this probably is not very helpful. GitHub login and node. So do they have a login with GitHub? I know I just deleted it, but so once you set that up, Okay. So this is the code that I was looking for. So it ends up, you end up using this for, so that way GitHub is able to understand which application is trying to log in, because as we had to set up our application, each one of you will have to do your own, so that way GitHub will be able to log in. And then this part is where it handles the redirect back from GitHub, which seems overly complicated. This looks like it's doing a lot of it manually, so let's do it with passport GitHub. Okay, I guess you just do it like that. So in here, I'm going to set up Redder get, or actually I think I copied all of it. So auth GitHub, and just to make it easier, just because to keep the same format, I'm actually going to change this to be /auth/GitHub/callback, which means that in a couple different sections, I'm going to have to change this as well. So I'm going to copy that to here. And then the other place that I'm going to have to change it is inside of our settings here. So I'll just change this to /auth GitHub callback. And now if I go to /auth/GitHub, did I type that wrong? Oh, sorry, that's not local. Okay. So /auth/GitHub. So did it log anything? Nope. Okay. So I'm going to push this code up right now, so that way it will be able to work on our Heroku instance. So push GitHub auth to Heroku. I'm guessing that I could probably also just change the homepage URL here, so that way I can just use, if I typed in like localhost instead of our Heroku application, it would work, but I'm just going to push this up and make sure that it's going. Still not found. Wait for this to finish deploying. Oh, this probably also has to be changed as well. So, in here, I'm just going to copy this. So the one thing that makes it sometimes a little bit difficult when you're working locally versus putting it on a cloud provider is when you are wanting to do the redirecting for callback, you're going to be using like localhost or 127.0.0.1 when you're testing it locally. Versus when you push it up to like your cloud provider, it's no longer going to be localhost. It's going to be your actual like domain name. So sometimes what you can do is you can set up two different applications. So that way you have one application that is set up for locally on your computer and then one for when you're actually logged in. But what the issue comes in is you don't want to have to change the code every single time before you push up to like GitHub and have it on any cloud provider. So what this comes into is what is called environment variables. So you can end up setting up an environment variable that changes depending on where it's hosted. So on your local machine, you would want it to be the authorization callback URL, you'll want to be localhost, versus when it's on Heroku, you're going to want it to obviously be the URL that's up here. So a way that you can do that, and this is kind of going like a little more advanced, is inside of settings. You have these config vars that allow you to set up a key value pair in the same way that you would with like a JSON object. So you could set up your client ID and your client secret in here. So you could do client ID, which is this, and then client secret is that. And then we also want GitHub auth callback. And lastly, we want home page URL. So the reason why this is really helpful is, as I said, if you were to move this to a different provider, you would be able to just pass it different environment variables without having to make any modifications to your code. So that way these variables are, when your application is started up, we'll get the variables that are there. So if I refresh this now, you can see that by going to /auth/GitHub, it now redirects me to GitHub, saying that this wants to access and is asking for authorization. I Click authorize. I get redirected back and it says user is not defined. So why is user not defined? Does it have any errors in here? No. /auth/github. Okay, user is not defined, and it looks like that error happens on our callback, which is right here. So in app, it's probably this part that's right here where we try to find the user. Oh, of course, because we haven't set up a strategy to being able to find them. Before we're using account.authenticate, but we need this user find one. So we could probably just switch it to just being, I'm going to try just doing it with account and seeing if that fixes it. Try it one more time. Still says user is not defined. Oh wait, because I haven't pushed that up. Okay, so I'm just going to change this just so I can use localhost for now. Update that. Okay. But you can now also see that I now have one user that's using my application. So you can just click revoke all user tokens if for some reason there was an issue with it and forcing them to re-authenticate. You can just revoke them all so you understand password. And now when they come back to your application, it still says that you have one user, but they will have to re-log in. So let's change this to being localhost 3000. /auth/github. Pretty sure I just changed it. Oh, it's probably because of the HTTPS. That's why. Okay. So now again, I have to log in. There we go. Account find or create is not a function. So the reason why now I'm getting this call stack that's right here is because when we end up deploying our application into Heroku or anything else, it ends up setting an environment variable that I just talked about before for its node environment being production. So as you can see here, this is the error message that ends up happening, but we don't end up getting that stack trace because obviously if you have an application, you don't want your users to get a message that would potentially confuse them. So usually we just give them a kind of helpful message, but not found is not that helpful. Does anyone have any questions about what we've done so far? Yep.
Those environment variables that you set in Heroku,
Yep.
do you have to do some code here in order?
Yes. Yeah. So we're not actually using them yet. In order to use an environment variable, we use the term process.env, and then it would be like our environment variable like that. So the only reason why I'm not using them yet is because I still have to configure them locally on my machine first. So there are, unfortunately, several different ways that you can do environment variables on your machine. For one, if you're on Windows, there is a way that you can configure environment variables that are on your machine globally. Then when we're using Node, you can configure it in a couple different ways. You can use a .env file that you will require into the project, which is probably the easiest way I think that we can do it. Or another way that you can also do it is attaching the environment variables to nodemon when we're running it in development. So that way you can have different environment variables for when you're running in development versus when you run it, which is actually a better way to do it, because that way you don't have to require in a file that's not going to potentially be there. So what I'll show you guys is you can create a file that's called nodemon config, or actually you can even do it under your package JSON. So I've mentioned before that package JSON, you can add a bunch of information to it, sometimes required by different packages. So what we're going to do is, that's really, inside of our package JSON, we're going to create a key that's nodemon config. And you can put it anywhere. It doesn't really matter. I'm just putting it up to the top so that it's easier. I believe it's just I think it's environment, and then it's another object, and then in here we can just type in test var is going to be ABC. Oh, and it doesn't like it because it's using a single quote instead of double quote. There we go. So when I save that, the other downside to using environment variables is if you end up changing them while your environment is running, it's loaded in at runtime. So as we've shown before, when you're just using Node by itself, if you end up changing a file, you have to kill the process and then restart, which is why we use nodemon. However, nodemon doesn't actually kill the whole process. It only actually ends up killing just that node instance that's running. So any environment variables that we're using, when we change them, won't actually take effect until we restart nodemon. So usually it's the best idea to figure out what your environment variables are going to be first, set them, and then usually they just sit there. There's not a lot of changing that usually happens unless if you add in a new environment variable. So if I just do a console log of process.env. I think it was, test var, and restart. Nope, that didn't work. There we go. Okay. So instead of environment, it's env. So now we can set up any sort of environment variables. So that way, again, when you deploy to different machines, it can work in different ways. And what's helpful with this is when you end up writing code that is reusable, for example, Vivian could write something that uses her email address and password that ends up sending an email. But of course, when she gives the code to me, she doesn't want to give me her username and password. She just wants to give me the code that ends up sending that email. So then in a configuration, I can configure it for just my email and password without having to share anything like that. So the important thing is, though, is that you're consistent, because you can't have different environment variables with names on the server versus on your machine. You're going to want it to be the exact same. So in here, we're going to need an environment variable of client ID. We're going to need client secret, GitHub auth callback, and homepage URL, which is going to be HTTP localhost 3000 /auth/GitHub/callback. our client secret is going to be this, and the client ID going to be that. So now I can do that. Save that, and as I said, I'm going to have to restart this because if I do a console log on client secret, you can see when we restart nodemon, it's undefined. But the moment that I stop it and restart, now we have our environment variable. So if I code passed is, oh yeah. So that doesn't exist. When we used user, it didn't exist, but let's see. Holy, it's already 1:08. I'm going to take now to just be a good chance to being able to go to have like a bathroom break or a quick 10-15 minute break if you guys need any food or anything like that. So if you guys want to be back here, say 1:20, 1:25. And I will just push up any code that I have done on GitHub. So GitHub auth. Okay, so anyway, the issue that we were running into just before the break with the user not working is because we don't have a user schema set up. Because we're using Passport with Mongoose, it comes into being a little bit trickier to getting it working. So I was trying to see if there's an easy way to use a Mongoose model with the Passport GitHub, and I didn't see anything set up for that, which of course makes it a little bit harder. Let's see, we have account, password. What I can try to do is try to require it in our account that we're using, rate, where'd that go? Right here. And this might end up working. I already have account right there. Account register. But I have a good feeling that it's probably not going to work. So inside of here we have Passport Authenticate. Might be able to just do this though. I'm going to comment this part out. And hope that works. Okay, so now we have GitHub. It comes in. And stuff definitely is breaking, so that did not work. So I'm trying to prevent having to make a user schema, but it's looking like that might be the only way that we can do that. Let's just see if there's one already made. User schema, passport, local mongoose. So we've done that. User is new schema. So we have the model. The model comes from our account. We take an account. So that should be able to work. Find by username specifies a query function. Passport GitHub. So create an application. Before using, you must register, which we've done. Configure the strategy. The GitHub authentication strategy authenticates users using GitHub using OAuth 2. Client ID and secret are contained when doing that. Strategy also requires verify callback, which receives the access token and optional refresh token, as well as a profile, which contains the authenticated user's GitHub profile. The verify callback must call CB, providing a user to complete authentication. So open up this example inside of their server. Created that strategy. Okay, so this is using Facebook strategy. And it does that. Yeah. So I'm just going to, instead of using their, where'd that go? Find. Okay. Comment that part out. And instead of finding one, I'm just going to use their callback to pass in the user. So this won't create the reference inside of our database because we haven't set up a user schema for it. But this will let us know upon the callback hitting our server if it is working as expected, which it should be because it's hitting the part that's not working. So oh, forgot to uncomment that part out. Okay. There we go. So error is not defined because we don't need that. So I'll pass null and try it one last time. User is not defined. Okay. Try it one more time. And that one's already expired because we just used it. User.get is not a function. auth/github. There we go. Okay. So this part is probably when we're trying to get the user information when they're logged in. So I should be able to just use the account, but I don't know why that's not doing it as expected. Account finder create is not a function, but it should be, unless if they've changed it in Mongoose. So Mongoose model should be the most recent one. Find. So it just might not actually be around anymore. So we've created our model, which the model comes with find by ID, okay. So find one and console log the error. So this is going to set up a couple stuff. So we try to find the account with a GitHub ID of the profile ID, which is returned from GitHub. And then it has a callback with an error and the user if it's found. However, we're probably going to be getting back an error because that user will not exist. So if I, whoops. So GitHub auth. I was hoping to not have to write stuff from scratch. So if the user does not exist, so if there's, what if I also console log user? Actually, so who here, when you guys have been writing code, has ever used a breakpoint before? Has anyone ever used a breakpoint? One person? A couple people? So the point of a breakpoint, if you don't know, is so that you can stop the code at that particular moment and be able to check what variables are set at, what its values are, so that way you can debug your code a lot easier. One thing with JavaScript is it's a little bit harder in order to debug it as opposed to normal tools, but you can attach your, you can do a debugging process inside of Node. So instead of doing just nodemon with, w or bin www, you also want -- inspect, which usually I just throw in inside of my scripts. I'll do another one with inspect and just call it debug. I usually find it the easiest way to be able to debug my application. So the reason why I'm trying to debug this is I want to see what the variable of, where is it? What user and error are right here before we return. So I can throw in a breakpoint using this, and then I have to add a configuration of nodejs. I don't actually want that. Add more. No, that's right. I'm just going to copy in one that I've used before. Okay. So what I want is to be able to attach to that process that I am trying to do. So attach to week 8 node, paste, and now I can run this, attach to the process, and now right when we get to this line, it'll break out. So auth/GitHub. And now here I can see that user is null and error. And the reason for that when both would be null would be if the user doesn't exist. So in this case, I'm just going to write an if statement of if there's no error and there's no user, I'm going to create it. So for some reason, there's no no function for being able to create, find, or create, which I guess used to exist at one point, but no longer exists. And we'll return that, put that there. Want to return the error. Otherwise, we want a new account. New account. And we're going to give it the profile. And then new github.save. And then return null new GitHub. This should hopefully work. So we've created that. I can hit play. And there we go. So now we're actually logged in, and you can log out. I'm going to remove that breakpoint that's right here. And I'm also going to put a login to GitHub button. So login to GitHub. Just going to take a photo of it. It's not going to be perfect, but and inside of public, I'm going to create a folder called images, paste it inside of there. Well, that didn't work. Here we go. And it has my mouse in it, but it works. So then inside of our view for our login form, we're going to also do an image. Well, we're going to do an anchor of href to /auth/GitHub. And inside of the anchor, I'm going to do an image with a source to /images/ and I'm going to rename this to GitHub login.png. GitHub login.png. Save that. Now when I refresh that, I have this sign in with GitHub. It's obviously much larger than the button, but when you click it, it logs us in. Then you can log out, log in, as well as you can do the email address that we signed up with last week, and that also works. So if we open up MLab, I can show you now what ended up getting put into the database. So we're still using, I believe it's week 6. We have accounts. So the first one that we created was the test@test.com, and it does this salting and hashing and all this other sort of stuff. But then the one that's right here is fairly basic. It just has a username. It has a _v for version, which is also included in this one by default, and then it just has an ID. So you can see that doing this is a little bit easier because, again, all you have to keep a reference in your application is the reference to that username, so that, yes, they've signed up before. So I'm going to push this up. So git add that, git commit account creation. And now if we wanted to get this working in Heroku, we can either change the application name and the callback that's here, or we can just create a second application that would be for Heroku. So I'm going to create a new app that's for Heroku. And the callback is going to be that. The home page is this. And I'm going to register it. And then I'm going to take the client ID, paste it in, which I think is the same. Or did that not? That didn't copy, that's why. Oh, there we go. And also the secret. And paste that in. So now that those are done, make sure that this is deployed. By going to the login page, we can now see that it's sign in with GitHub. And if I click it, we're now logged in. I can log out, log in. However, if we refresh this, oh, that's still on localhost. I thought I had opened open app, login, sign in. I think it is redirecting after the fact. Yeah. So you can see right here, I'm on COMP2106 winter 2019 on my Heroku app, and then when I click sign in with GitHub, what it ends up doing is it goes to GitHub, and then it does the callback, but it's actually sending it to my local host server right now because it is using a different thing. So I check my environment variables. Actually, no, the reason why it's doing that is I've set up all these environment variables, but I actually haven't changed them inside of the application. So if we use process.env and then we need the name of it, which is the GitHub auth callback, we can throw that there. As well as in our client ID, we're also going to have to change that as well. So we need client ID, so process.env.that and process.env.client secret. I believe there's one other place in our application that we're using the callback, and I think it's inside of our route that we created for logging in. No, that's actually, I think that's the only place that we used it. Okay. So I'm just going to save that now and cancel, restart. So I should be able to locally here, when I refresh, I can log in with GitHub. That works. Log out, log in with this, and it works. But now if I switch to environment variables and push that up, now our application should be using the environment variables that are inside of our settings. So I'm just going to deploy that. So that way it gives me this to see that it's deploying. Okay. So now if I open up the application, it's taking, there we go. Go to /login, sign in with GitHub. Now you can see that it's wanting to authorize me for our Heroku application that we set up instead of our local one. So that's why I was a little confused on why this wasn't popping up, because now it's a new application. So I have to authorize this as well and authorize it, get redirected back, and now I'm in the full application. And from now, I can now use GitHub to log in either locally or in the Heroku one. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. Let's see. If I open up the routes, I believe we still have some authenticated routes from before. So there's an ensure authenticated. So we had made it so that if you try to actually create a new class, we have this middleware right here that ensures that it's authenticated. So anything from here on down will require you to be authenticated. So we can just throw this up top so that instead of requiring it on the post, we'll make it so that you have to be authenticated everywhere in order to get to /classes. So I'm actually going to comment that out first and show you. So right now we're still should be authenticated. Yep. And I go to /classes and I can see all the class list. But when I do that, oh, hold on, sorry, local again, not the, okay. Let me comment that out one more time. So I can sign in with GitHub. I'm now logged in. I can go to classes. But if I put in that middleware again and refresh, I can go to classes, log out, go to classes, doesn't work. So just like with using the Passport local, we can also use Passport GitHub without any changes to our code in order to require authentication for certain parts of our application. So that's why using something like Passport is really useful, because without any changes, we're able to use it. And like I said, they have 502 different strategies. I can't necessarily guarantee that every one of them is good, but it does make it easier in our application. We could end up writing our own Passport to handle like custom authentication if that's something that we wanted to do. But they do have like a lot of different strategies that come right out of the box. So yeah, is there any questions about using OAuth 2 or anything with like Passport and GitHub? No? Okay. There was originally going to be a lab for this. I'm not going to assign you a lab because you guys are going to be having assignment 2 part 1. So with that being said, I guess that's the class. Going to end early today, so I'm sure you guys can't necessarily complain about that. Again, the only thing that I would just like to stress is please, for the assignment, use your own work. Yeah, so that's it. So hope everyone has a good weekend, and if you guys have any questions, I can be up here to answer them or whatever. You did have a question though.
Yeah, for the assignment.
For the assignment?
We're using GitHub as a group. Do we just use one person's GitHub? Or?
Yeah. Inside of GitHub, have you guys ever collaborated before in GitHub projects?
Yes, but not to the extent that we were able to change stuff.
Okay. So inside of GitHub, so you guys have actually partially already done this. So when you guys have created private repositories and then invited me to be able to view them, that's adding me as a collaborator. And what that means is now, because I'm a collaborator on it, I can push and pull to it no problem. But just to show you, so inside, this was week 8. I can go to contributors under settings, collaborators. And what's your GitHub? FEL?
Yeah.
Yeah. AN? ROD? That one.
Yeah.
So I can add you as a collaborator. And then from here, it will send an email to your whatever email that you're using. And it just has like a, accept invitation or cancel. And then from here, once you add them as a collaborator, they are able to push and pull in the same way that you are, because you can set up their ability. So it has right here, push access to the repository. I believe there's also other things that you can do as well. But I would recommend doing this because then it's actually better for me to being able to see who has pushed what code in the project. So I can see like who collaborated on, say, like the index file versus like a different kind of file. So, but yeah, so so you accepted it. So now you're there. And now that's, can you open up this repository and go to, let's do create new file. And then call it readme.md. Readme is typically all in capitals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just do, in that file, do # space hello world. And then click save or publish or whatever green button is going to be there. You might have to do like a commit message just saying like create README file. And now you can see it right here. So now you just created a file in my project, no problem. And if I go into settings, go to collaborators, I can just kick you off. And now you don't have access to it anymore. Yeah. So that's how it works. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, the only thing that takes is just figuring out whose GitHub repository that it's going to be on first. There is something else that you can also do that's a little bit more advanced. So in GitHub, there's what's called forking. So a public repository that allows for forking has right here. Okay. So up at the top right, you can see this fork button. And what this does is it creates basically a clone of the application. And then you can do a merge request into it. So what I can do is I can fork it. So I can fork it to another thing. So I'm just going to, it would be easier if I had like another login. Is there anyone who wants to like come and log in to their GitHub up here?
Or invite you to something?
Logging in would probably be the easiest. So that way I can fork this repository to your local GitHub. We won't worry about it. I'll just fork it to this. So now it takes a little bit as it copies over all the code. So now I can make a change to the README file. So I'll edit this and I'll say showing off how forking works and example. I want to commit that just into master, it doesn't matter. So any changes that I make into this fork are not going to be made into the original. So if I open this up, you can see that where I forked it from. And this is the README here, and that's README there. But now I should be able to do, yeah, so you can do a pull request now. So you do a pull request. And what this is saying is my changes that I've made in version of this code, I want to merge in to the main version of the code. So you can see right here, head repository is basically your changes, and you can choose like what branch, and then you have the base repository, which is what you're wanting to merge into. And now this creates a pull request. So we use these all the time at work, and what it is you get to like assign who it's going to, all this sort of stuff. But basically it's for collaboration, especially in like open source projects or just in teams. So you create a pull request. Takes a little bit. So now inside of the main, you can see right here that I want to merge one commit into my version of master from this version of master. And you can look at the commits, see how many there are. You can view the file changes. And then once you're thinking it's all said and done, you can just merge it, confirm. That's good to go. And then if you want, you can just delete the fork. So that was accepted. So now I don't care about it anymore. So now I can just copy, should be able to just copy that full thing, get rid of that, and it's gone. Doesn't exist anymore. But when I go into here, now my changes are there. So this is a way, usually if you're trying to contribute to open source, they're not going to give you push and pull rights. That's just not going to happen. So what you do is you end up forking that repository, you make the changes to it that you want, and then you can do a pull request saying, here are my changes that I've made, please accept them. This is a little more advanced. The easiest way is probably just to use collaborators. But if you want to be able to also have that code on your repository, then you can fork it. So those are two different methods of being able to collaborate on the same project together. This way you don't have to have that. And then the other thing that I would say, not saying that everyone is perfect, But if you know that your friend writes really bad code and you want to review that code before it gets merged in, you can look at what those changes are and kind of like have that, you know, like pair programming where you can look at his code that he's just created and you go, maybe we should do something else. So this allows that process to happen of being able to review each other's code and see what, really just making sure that you get in what works. So yeah, with that being said, that's the end of class. If anyone has any more questions, I'm up here.